2. Good morning, everybody. It
Hi,
is February. It's March
March.
21st. I don't even know what day it is. And we are live here with Dr. Harry Lever. Many of you recall Harry has been a frequent visitor to Tales from the Heart, a podcast from the HCMA. And many of you received care at the hands of Dr. Lever before his retirement from the Cleveland Clinic. And we are really happy to have Harry with us today. It is March, and March is Medical Management March here at the HCMA. Actually, it's Arrhythmia Management March as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about meds, and we're going to talk a little bit about arrhythmias. Actually, I had the wrong topic for the month, but I think we're going to talk mostly about meds today. And we know that Dr. Lever has been a passionate supporter of high-quality generic drugs for a long time. So we're going to take a little time to talk about that today. We're also going to talk about some current events. And we are living through some very unusual times here in the United States. So you might hear some conversation that you might not think is associated with HCM, but at the core of everything, access to healthcare is one of the most important things that somebody with a genetic heart muscle disorder could be interested in. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today too. Good morning, Harry, and welcome back to the
Good
podcast.
morning. Morning.
So, how are things in Ohio today, Harry?
I guess all right. I haven't heard anything that I didn't have my TV on this morning, so I don't know for sure.
Well, that's kind of the world we're living in today. Things change by the minute, but some things are a little bit more understood, and we do have some control over some parts of our life. And when you're living with HCM, understanding how to manage your health is really important. So, we are going to Capitol Hill in a couple of weeks to talk about a problem that you and I have been talking about for many years, and that's the generic drug quality problem. And I'd like to talk a little bit about medications that we use in hypertrophic cardiomyopathy and why it's important to get good quality drugs. So, let's talk about the most common drug used in HCM historically, and I'm going back now for a good 30 plus years, and that is beta blockers. Specifically, the brand name was Toprol XL, and then it became available in a generic many years ago. So let's talk a little bit about the role of a beta blocker and the role of metoprolol specifically to HCM, Harry.
Well,
How, go ahead.
it's an important drug because it keeps the heart rate slow, and when there's resting or provocable obstruction, it can reduce that obstruction, and that has been very helpful for patients. And we need to be careful though that you're getting good quality drugs, and we don't want drugs that are coming from places where they don't make them very well. I had one patient who was taking a brand of the drug and suddenly got into very severe trouble. And when we got the drug tested, which is something new, we didn't have that capability before. Now we have laboratories that can test drugs. We got the drug tested, it didn't dissolve properly. So the patient got into acute trouble, went into heart failure, and we realized what was wrong and got a good brand, and they got better. But it's really important that you make sure that the drug dissolves properly. And what we're doing now is there are a number of brands that are being tested through the Defense Department, and we're hoping to. I don't know they're not telling me yet who the actual manufacturers are because they don't have all the data. But once they do, there'll be certain brands that we'll be able to. We're going to grade the drugs from green to yellow to red. If it's red, then it's most likely not going to work. So we're in the process of finding out how many of each one there are, and when we know that, we'll be in touch and let you know. And that means when the drug is tested, and if it tests okay, even if it's a generic from a foreign country, we probably will be able to use it once it's tested. And that's what we're waiting for, all the data. We don't have all the data that we need, but the authorized generic is still okay, but it's a little bit more money. If we can get some of these other drugs tested and we make sure that they're working all right, then they may even be cheaper than what we're dealing with now.
So beta blockers are used in HCM. Why? What do they do?
They slow the heart rate. They can also affect the blood pressure, but and they can drop the pressure gradient, and that's what we're looking for it to do.
So beta blockers work to slow our heart rate. And if we are on a 12-hour preparation, so a twice-a-day dosing, how important is it that that drug is delivered equally over those 12 hours?
It's important that it be that way. And in some patients, we can get away with once a day. And there's some patients that may need twice a day. But there's some that can be once a day. Just depends, and it depends on how much you use. If you use a higher dose, you might get away with once a day. And but we also don't want to use the short acting stuff, because that clearly doesn't last long enough to help the patient.
Okay, so we like long-acting drugs when they work as long-acting drugs.
Right.
And one of the biggest problems we've seen with some of the generics is that the controlled release mechanism doesn't work right. And that's where you have a problem with something called dissolution. Right. Can you explain that to our listeners?
Well, dissolution means how it dissolves. And we've got to make sure that it dissolves properly. If it dissolves too quickly, then it's not going to work. I had one patient who was using a brand that it dissolved so quickly that it wasn't around long enough to do anything, and nothing happened. And patient got into very serious trouble and went into heart failure because the drug was doing nothing.
So we will be addressing this issue on our Hill Day when we go to Capitol Hill and explain what our elected officials can do to improve our lives. We want to make sure that the drugs that we are taking in this country are safe. And that might mean more manufacturing in the United States. That might mean more evaluation of drugs coming in from other countries so we know what's going on. And no matter what your political affiliation is, we all want safe, effective drugs. So we all need to work together to find a path towards that. So beta blockers are really important, and we know that they've been one of the drugs most hit by poor quality generic quality, right? Just bad quality.
Right.
So we need to make sure that we find the good ones. We know the authorized generic is good. We know it is safe. We know it has a proper dissolution rate and a proper drug quality, and no contaminants. That's the other thing we haven't really talked a lot about, but these other drugs can have some contaminants in them. So we talked about beta blockers. Those are the most important drug that we've used in HCM over the past 40 plus years, mainstay of therapy. But we also use things like calcium channel blockers. Could you talk a little bit about what a calcium channel blocker is and why we use it?
Well, calcium channel blockers are verapamil or diltiazem, and they also, both of them, slow the heart rate, and slowing the heart rate is important for patients with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. They also can be effective in treating atrial fibrillation, and it's important that we have that available too. Also, it turns out that diltiazem has been around for a while, but there weren't many studies with it. And what I had found was when you sort of got, when the drug became available, I started getting used to using it, and it has a good effect. It clearly slowing the heart rate is very important, and it was amazing when we started using it how well it worked. But again, there were a lot of people that just didn't realize that you could use it, and so now we are.
Yeah,
And
we are. Yeah.
and the other thing you can sometimes use is you can use diltiazem and a beta blocker, and that can be helpful also.
I have been there. I have done that. So it did work for a while for me. Once somebody passes a beta blocker or calcium channel blocker, I'm going to go historically before the availability of myosin inhibitors, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But what other drug types are useful in HCM? Like, let's talk about sodium channel blockers. What are they and why do
Well, the one that Norpace is the one drug that's very helpful.
Mhm.
The problem with it is it can slow the heart rate, but in men it can have an effect on the prostate, and they may have difficulty with urination. So that's been a problem. The drug does work, but you've got to be very careful that you don't cause urinary retention.
So Norpace is the brand name, disopyramide is the generic name.
Right.
So, and we like a Norpace CR used as opposed to a generic
Right.
disopyramide because you're up and down
That's right.
too quickly on the dosing. So the name brand there is really recommended because the generics is just too variable.
Right.
So we have sodium channel blockers. We have antiarrhythmics. Why would we use antiarrhythmics and when?
Well, we use antiarrhythmics when people have ventricular tachycardia, and can also use it if there's a supraventricular tachycardia or atrial fibrillation. And unfortunately, people with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy can have atrial fibrillation, and for people who don't have hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, we can use a drug called digoxin, but you can't use that in people who have hypertrophic cardiomyopathy because it increases the contractility and can make the gradient worse in patients with HOCM.
And then there's the Mac Daddy antiarrhythmic. There's two I put in the Mac Daddy category right now. So we have amiodarone and Ticasol.
Right.
So amio has been around for a long time, and it's kind of it's a tough drug because the side effects are very potent.
That's right.
And can be worse than the underlying rhythm, because it can cause thyroid issues, liver issues, pulmonary issues. So it's a great drug if it doesn't kill you.
Right.
So talk a little bit about the amiodarone.
Well, it one of the things that it really can affect is your thyroid, and you've got to be really careful that you don't become hyperthyroid. If you become hyperthyroid and you have hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, you can have an increase in heart rate, which could cause you lots of trouble. And the other thing it does is it can affecting the thyroid, it can cause the heart rate to increase because it can make you hyperthyroid. So we have to be very careful with that. And I think that now with the newer drugs, the need for amio is going to be a lot less.
I agree. We've seen a decrease, but we've seen an increase in Ticasol. So you want to talk a little bit about Ticasol and what we're using that?
Haven't used that in a while, the Ticasol, but
it falls in and out of favor over the past 15 or so years.
Right.
It's again kind of like it seems to be a bridge. Doesn't work forever.
Right.
Okay. But those are most commonly the drugs. Some people will use a little bit of ranolazine, like for chest pain, and there is some reduction in chest pain from the use of ranolazine. There was a trial in a drug called eleclazine. And interestingly, going through some things in my house the other day, I found my last clinical trial bottle of eleclazine from the clinical trial that ended in 2016. So I brought it to work as a souvenir because it's part of HCM history now. That did not work very well, unfortunately. I think if they did that trial differently, we might have seen some different results, but it didn't work. It was a negative trial. But I did my part, and I was a trial participant. So let's take this bridge to talk about something very, very important and has come under a little bit of public scrutiny the past couple of months, weeks, days, and that's the clinical trial process and how it is really coming under a little bit of scrutiny that is getting a little confusing to follow. So we want new drugs to treat diseases that we haven't treated yet, but we're kind of looking at our governmental systems to manage those processes of clinical trials, and they're kind of under attack. And we need good, smart, knowledgeable people with experience in these places to do the jobs of shepherding through a drug from concept to application in the prescribing world. So I put out a statement here that is very simple. Clinical trials save lives. We are a country of innovation, and I don't want to see that change. Harry, any thoughts on the importance of clinical trials in the future of our country?
Well, I think that we have got to be doing them here in this country, and we've got to be manufacturing the drugs in this country. We can't, there's been too much problems with drugs being made overseas in situations that we don't have much control over, and we've got to have more control over the drugs that we use, and we've got to know they've got to be tested. And one of the things that has come to light is if you're going to ship the drug from a country overseas, how's it going to get here? Because you got to worry about, you're going to ship it on a ship, or you're going to put it on an airplane. How long is it going to take to get here? Is it going to be properly refrigerated? And if it's not, we can have very serious problems. And I think that by and large, we really have to be looking to make the drugs in this country so that we don't have the shipping issues. That's can be a really bad problem.
For anybody who's wondering what he could possibly be talking about on shipping issues, if you've ever been to a shipyard or even driven past one with those big metal container boxes, they're all full of different kinds of commodities, and drugs are one of them. And if they're being transported in that manner, we do not know what the temperature controls are. And we know when certain drugs are heated up too much, they can change the chemical compound. Right. Tacrolimus is one of them, liquid tacrolimus especially. So we have to make sure that when a drug is being transferred, you check any label of a drug in your cabinet and it'll have a temperature. This one says it shouldn't be stored over 86 Fahrenheit. 30 Celsius. If you've ever been out on a tarmac on a hot day waiting to take off and the air conditioning goes off on your plane for a few minutes and it starts to heat up pretty fast, imagine what it's doing underneath the fuselage and imagine what a tanker is doing and how hot those things are getting. How are we getting our drugs here? Are they safely distributed? And once they get here and they're in a mail truck or they're in wherever, we're not monitoring the temperatures. This is important. If this is the way most of us are going to get our medication through mail order, what is the temperature control and how safe is it to be at higher temperatures for longer periods of time? These sound like little petty issues. I know that, but they're really important issues and they're at the core of the quality of our medication supply. So it's a big deal. It's not a partisan issue. It's an everybody issue, and nobody did anything, quote, wrong. We're all trying to get drugs to people in the fastest and safest way possible. Nobody did anything to be like nefarious here. It's just the world we live in. And we need to sit down and talk to each other and say, okay, how do we get through this problem together without saying you did it or I did it or because you did this, then this. No, the world is warmer. It's just the way it is. And transporting drugs across the entire world is a complicated process. So we need to be talking about this. And it's starting to percolate out there. I've been to a couple of meetings lately where it's coming up, but it's the word climate that seems to be concerning to some people in not the right way. We're not supposed to talk about the climate. We have to talk about the climate. The climate is what it is, and we're living in it. So if it's getting warmer, we need to make sure our medications are safe from that warmer temperature. Basically, it would be nice if we could lower the temperature, but that's a much bigger problem, and we can't solve that here. We can talk about getting you your drugs safely, though. So that is another issue that we need to worry about in drug availability. But, Harry,
Yeah.
we have a bigger issue at hand when it comes to managing HCM, and that is the access to health care for all of us. When you hear things like there's a potential to dismantle the Medicaid system, how many patients do you believe that you saw throughout your career who were on Medicaid?
Oh, a lot. I can't give you an exact number, but yeah, it's a lot, and
They need care.
they sure do.
And we need to figure out a way to do that as effectively as possible. So within here in the HCMA's community, we just did a quick scrub this morning of our database, and I got to get stronger numbers, but we are somewhere between 17 and 20% of all of the people that we work with are on Medicaid. And many of them are children. And those who are not children are adults with serious cardiac complications who cannot maintain work or who live in states that do not require employers to provide health insurance. And if they're not providing health insurance, these low wage earners cannot get access to health care without being in the ACA. If they're not in ACA or if they're not in a Medicaid expansion state, they don't have any access to health care. I'm currently working with a young lady. She lives in the South. She is not yet 30 years old. She has a very severe presentation of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, probably leading towards transplant imminently. However, she works in a line of work that doesn't provide health insurance, and her state does not provide Medicaid. This young woman needs a transplant. Her ejection fraction's under 30% right now. And without health insurance, she will not get her transplant. She will die young. And I thought we've worked really hard to make that not happen. So over the past 30 years, we have worked to improve diagnosis, improve management, improve treatments, create new drugs. We didn't talk about myosin inhibitors yet. I'm going to hold that one for later because there's some major issues around myosin inhibitors that we have to confront. But this young lady is probably not going to get access to any of those innovations. And if we pull Medicaid, a lot of other people aren't going to get access to innovation. And they're not going to get access to the drugs that are going to improve and save their lives and make them viable members of society able to contribute and pay taxes. So I don't really care what you politically believe in. Do we believe as a civilized nation that we take care of the ill, that we provide a pathway away from suffering? I think that's kind of what I've spent my life doing, is trying to find pathways to make people feel better and not die young from HCM. And we have created such amazing pathways towards that you could go to something called the Wonder Database, but you really can't right now because it's run by the CDC and they've changed the functionality of it. So you used to be able to see state by state who died from what diagnosis. Now you can only see regions. I don't know why that data is no longer available, but it was available up until January of 2025. It's no longer available by state. Maybe it'll come back. I don't know. I don't know why we're withholding that information. I'm a little concerned over that one, not going to lie. But we have to know who's living and who's dying and who's suffering. And if we pull away national databases, we're not going to be able to calculate that. So I'm here trying to make people healthier and safer and ensure access for all to access to healthcare, but we're up against some challenges right now. So we did all this work through clinical trials. We did all this work through understanding disease. We did all this work to prove safe drug. And now we have a labeled drug for those with HCM called a myosin inhibitor. One is approved by the FDA, that's mavacamten or Camzyos. The other is still under investigation and due to get an answer later this year. That is aficamten.
Yeah.
The Camptons have done miraculous things to our community. They've improved health. They have returned people to a quality of life they hadn't known in a very long time. It doesn't work for everybody. No drug ever does. But for those it works for, it has been life changing. And it's expensive because it took a lot of money to do all that work to figure this out, to get it to you. And we then have to play the game of PBMs, health insurance companies, step therapy, questions about access to care to get the thing that we work so hard to create. Harry, what do you think about myosin inhibitors, and why should patients get access?
Well, I think they are really good things, and we need to people need to have access, and at the same time, we've got to, as you said, we've got to figure out a way to really pay for it. I mean, this is a major issue, and I think that we've got to figure out a way that they don't cost so much. I mean, it's the problem. I'll tell you that it's not just these drugs, but there are a lot of other drugs out there, asthma drugs, that all of a sudden the price has gone up, and that should not. These are newer drugs, and for some reason they've really gone up in price, and we've got to figure out a way to drop that price. Unfortunately, I've had personal experience with that, and my son, who got into trouble with COVID, and all of a sudden, the drug that he was getting some stuff coming out of China, and it really wasn't working. And yet, to get some of these newer drugs that we get our hands on, they're very expensive, and then we run into the problem of the insurance companies who don't want to pay, and can't allow them to practice medicine. They're trying to tell doctors what dose to use. You can't. They didn't go to medical school. They don't have a medical license, and we've got to make sure that the physicians are allowed to do what needs to be done to take care of these patients, and sometimes that doesn't happen. And you've also some of these some of the drugstores only carry certain brands, and you've got to be very careful about what brand you're going to get. So,
and running your pharmacy operation. We didn't talk about this before the podcast, but something else is happening in the country that I don't think people are paying a lot of attention to right now because it's still working its way through. But the largest distributor of pharmaceuticals in our country is CVS Caremark. Mm-hmm. They have the biggest distribution channel. They do mail order, they do brick and mortar, they do specialty pharmacy. It's an enormous organization, and it's just about as close to a monopoly as I think we've ever seen. Everybody will say, well, what about Walgreens? Well, Walgreens just got sold to private equity.
Lost you.
Okay, I can hear you. Fix your audio. I can hear you. We've been having some technical difficulties with Dr. Leber. So I'm going to pull him off screen for just a second.
I'm all right. I'm off.
You're off.
Unmuted. Okay. I'm unmuted.
Okay. I don't know why I keep flipping him to muted. So anyway, Walgreens was bought by private equity, which means they are not going to be beholden to stockholders and the wishes of stockholders. And they're likely to close a lot of stores, and they're likely to cut out those who are less in less affluent areas. And that's where a lot of these patients are getting their medications from. So I would look very closely on who bought them. The private equity firm seems to only be very interested in the front of the house, meaning the retail side, because they have, they own Staples and clothing stores and things like that. They don't do healthcare, but they bought it. Now they're going to figure out who's going to run their pharmacy component and what that's going to look like. If private equity is owning our access to health and health services like drugs, we might be beholden to their ethics and what they think we should have or shouldn't have. We don't know like what private equity can do, what they want to do. It's a privately held business, but they've got access to distributing our medications. And this is something you should be concerned with. It doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing, but it's a shift. What else do we have to worry about? Transparency in PBM. So plan benefit managers who manage the flow of drugs in and out of a system. They take a cut. We pay the copays and deductibles. We don't get a piece of their benefit that they get. They're beholden to their stockholders, and health insurance companies are beholden to their stockholders, which primarily are the large banks. So where are the people in all of this? We got lost. And we need to put ourselves back in the middle because healthcare is about people. It's not about business. And yes, it is a business, but the priority should be the health of people. And we're going to have to use our voices to speak up for this and make sure no matter whether you live in a red or blue state, that we are working on equal access to healthcare. Did I just say another bad word? I said equal. I said equality. I guess that's a bad word now, but it's just not to me. I think we're all equal. I don't think anybody's better than anybody else. I don't think somebody should get access to healthcare by their proximity, their location, or their tax form. I think we should all deserve equal access to care. We have more people and less doctors. Waits are going to be longer. We're seeing it already. We're seeing a burnout in our medical professionals because they're asking too much and they're giving them such a hard time. We are in as close to an outright crisis that I've ever seen. And I'm not being hyperbolic, but we all are going to need to raise our voices because our lives depend upon access to care. So, Harry, what else is going on? Is there any good news in the world today?
No, but that's absolutely right. It's very hard to get appointments for patients.
Yeah.
Very difficult.
And it's only going to get harder. And if we want to do the work that we set out 30 years ago to do, almost 30 years ago, and that is to diagnose the undiagnosed and get them to care. And we are right on the brink of being able to use technology to aid in the discovery of more with genetic heart muscle disorders and get them to the care that they need. We need to do that. But if we can't get people the help they need once we diagnose them, then why are we working to diagnose them? We want to save lives, and we're going to need a system that supports us in doing that. And we have to make sure that it's there for us.
Yep.
I'm trying to come up with, I do have some fun, happy news. We should have an announcement out of the state of Virginia next Monday. So stay tuned for that. I believe we're going to have a new law in the state of Virginia, but we just got to wait for the governor to sign it, that every well child examination in the state of Virginia will include cardiac screening. So we can help identify children at risk and get there in time. That's what we're trying to do. Keep families whole as long as possible. So there, yay to the state of Virginia. You're going to have to start working with the state governments more closely, people. If we're not going to have a Department of Education that's going to make sure that your children have access to services they need if they have a disability, then you're going to have to double check on your state level coverage. And a lot of states do not provide any coverage at all for children with disabilities because they, quote, relied upon the federal government to do that. Well, if the federal government's not doing that and the state government's not doing that, who's going to make sure that kids with disabilities, including hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, are afforded the accommodations they need to be successful? That's what we use the Department of Education for those with disabilities. And if you didn't know that that's one of the things that they did, you might want to double check on how this is going to impact you. Because if you have a child who has an IEP, or if you have a child with a 504 plan, if you have a child who has medical needs in a school system, public schools have to provide those services because the Department of Education mandate that they do. If they do not have that mandate, they then default to state regulation, which may not exist, or may say you have to come up with an alternative education system for your child. We will not provide those services. If you send your children to a private school on a voucher system, they are not required to provide any accommodations at all for a child with a disability. Period. They don't even have AEDs in a lot of the private schools or the charter schools. So public schools are where they have the most concerns. So how can you, so Ross is asking, how can I make sure gene positive kids are protected? Without the Department of Education, you can't. You can't protect them unless your state has decided to do so. So we've got a lot of issues going on that directly impact the HCM community. And we will be advocating for the protection of our constituents and those with HCM and those who care about those with HCM and other thick heart disorders. And that is part of who we are as an organization. It is not a political status. It is what is important to those with genetic heart muscle disorders. And we're watching a lot of the protections afforded to our community to be removed. So we're happy to open up to questions. I know lots of you like to ask Dr. Leber questions. So we've got about 10, 15 minutes here that we can address some questions. So feel free to post them. Harry, is there anything else that you want to say about what's going on?
Well, I think we've got to make sure that the lives of people count. And, no monkey business. We've got to, and I'm, when you've taken institutions like the NIH, that all of a sudden it's not working like it's supposed to, we got a problem. And, people can't do their jobs there and do research. And that's a very serious problem. And we've got to make sure that it does get done. And, we've got to, realize that we're in the business to take care of people, and people need to know that. And there can't be any monkey business. That's the problem.
So I wasn't sure I was going to mention this today, but why not? Not all of you know this, but I did something back in the 90s that's pretty big. I sued the NIH. I filed a federal tort claim against the United States of America for the actions of one of their staff members at the National Institute of Health. It is all documented. You can look it up, and it's all there. I was administrator ad prosequendum on behalf of my sister's estate after her death from mismanagement at the hands of a rogue researcher at the NIH. You would think, based on my previous interactions, that I would be very much in favor of dismantling of the NIH, but I am not. I stand 150% behind the NIH and their mission. I was harmed by one bad person. My family was harmed by one bad person. My sister is no longer here because of one bad person. But you know what happened? I had regress, and we stopped the bad actor. We removed him from his position. The infrastructure was there to take care of the problem, which was very weird. It was a very unusual circumstance. We got rid of the bad guy. It was done. We had a proper recourse, and I used my rights as a citizen to hold my government accountable for a bad act. That is the beauty of America. Would I rather have my sister here today? Absolutely. Would I rather have not gone through the nonsense that I did from 1995 to 2002 going through that process? Yes. But we did the right thing. We blew a whistle. We brought attention to a problem. We solved a problem within a system that is created for the people. And I still support the NIH today. And I support the staff of the CDC. I support the staff of the FDA. The good people doing the good work every day to help us get safe drugs and safe devices to our people, to our people. Without the work of the FDA, implantable defibrillators probably wouldn't be as common as they are today and saving lives all over the world. The drugs that we've created in the United States have saved millions of lives and improved millions of lives. The research done at the NIH is at the foundation of almost all of that discovery. And it is an important element in our country that keeps us innovative and ahead. And thank you to all of the members of the NIH. Thank you to all of those staff members working tirelessly to improve our lives. And I support them 1,000%. You remember those days, Harry?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
They were complicated days and there were bad players and we did good things to stand up to bad players.
Yep.
And we were able to. And we should be able to. And hopefully we'll build, maintain, support a strong research foundation because we need it. Okay, so we have quiet people today. Not a lot of questions from the field. If you have any questions, this would be a good time to ask them. Let's see if we missed anything here. We have a greetings from Italy. That was sweet. And we had a question from Ross today. Anybody else with any questions? Now would be the time to ask. Harry, we're going to go down to DC. We're going to meet with David Lay, and I have had the lovely opportunity to meet Colonel Vic, and he will be there testifying with us as well. We have real people with real stories, and we're going to hopefully engage our elected officials to hear what is important to our community and our entire community. So our community is not just the patients and the families, it's the physicians, it's the pharma companies, it's the entire ecosystem that builds discovery and brings advances to patients. And we need to make sure that we are keeping everything where it needs to be, focused on the patients and keeping people safe.
Yep.
Okay, well, I guess we're going to wrap for the day because this is such a positive. It's so hard to be positive right now, but we're going to be, and we're going to find a path forward. And we're going to go to Washington, D.C. with our head held high and looking for reasonable, rational people who understand that the quality of the generic drugs we are using in this country are important. Important. So let's keep it going, guys. Let your voices be heard. Talk to your elected officials. Make sure we maintain access to health care for all those on Medicaid because 20% of our population is about to become uninsured. Let's do the right thing. All right. Harry, thank you for joining us once again. And we'll see you next time on Tales from the Heart. Thank you to all of our sponsors. You can find them on our website. And I know Joey's going to drop some links in here, so he'll tell you all about the sponsors and other upcoming events. Take care, everybody.
Yep.